I've been spending way too much time trying to manually color correct my videos in Davinci Resolve, but now I've found this handy little gadget, and it's really saving me time. This video is all about how I use this little tool to do color correction in Davinci Resolve. I think it's worth pointing out up front that I paid for this with my own money. This isn't a sponsored video or anything like that, but this is a piece of equipment that I found really useful for streamlining my workflow, definitely enabling more accurate color correction to be done quickly. So what actually is it? Well, this is the ColorChecker Video Passport Edition from X-Rite. As you can see from this form factor, it's pretty ideal for taking out and about, popping in your kit bag, not taking up too much of that valuable space. It folds up, it's not much bigger than a couple of credit cards. Snazzy, colourful lanyard here to attach it somewhere on your body to stop it blowing away over a cliff or something if you're out in inclement conditions, which I find myself often being. So when you first open it up, there are two sections. The first of those is this area that has the majority of all of the colour correction material. There's also a second section you can fold over here, which has a white balance card, so that's useful to use quickly whilst you're out and about, just to get a reading through the camera. And this, I'm not actually sure what that does, to be brutally honest. Haven't used it yet. I'm sure I'll find out in due course. I'm going to take you through the workflow that I use in this video to see if that could be something useful for the way that you want to work. And this is all focused on working in Davinci Resolve. The first thing I'm going to want to know, because it does seem to streamline the process a little bit further, is what was the ambient color temperature where I was shooting. So the video that we're going to use for this mini tutorial was shot outside. It was mid-morning, and so therefore, as I understand it, there's probably somewhere around 6,500 Kelvin. That's my start point. Here's my footage that I would like to color correct. A couple of things to note before we get going. First of all, why am I doing the color correction? From my point of view, I think it's really important to try to get a neutral, accurate as possible baseline color correction before doing anything more creative on top. Perhaps using LUTs from your favorite YouTuber, you know, that kind of thing, or just applying your own kind of creative changes. So that's really what I'm after, is a basic, as accurate as possible, baseline color correction. Second thing to note, in this case, the camera that I'm using doesn't have a log output specifically, no kind of raw video output. What it does have is a neutral setting for the color science, so that is what I'm using. And just for the record here, the camera is a Canon EOS RP. I'm going to show you a process that I use for, I think, a fairly quick baseline color correction. And the first thing that we're going to want to note is which screen we're in to do this work. Coming down to the bottom of the screen here, and as you can see, I'm in the color section. I've selected my footage by clicking into the frame. I'm on the frame that I want to use. I use a 3-step process to get the baseline color correction that I want, and to help me to keep track of where I am with that, the first thing that I'm going to do is to add a correction node for the first step of the process. So I'm going to use Alt and S on the keyboard to add a new node. It just helps us to have a nice clean way of keeping track of the changes we're making, and if we need to deselect or select those different nodes as we move through the color correction process. Okay, before we get into the workflow itself, just a little bit of orientation. Here we are in colour screen. Typically when you first land in here, you might find that you've got these colour wheels on the bottom left hand side, and then on the right hand side probably you're going to have something like this, which is the keyframes timeline. Actually, we don't want either of those things at this point in time when we're doing our colour correction, but you'll see how those change by default in any case. The first step out of my 3 steps is using the colour match feature to really do the heavy lifting using my colour card. If you've got a colour card that is natively supported within Davinci Resolve, and I'll show you how you can see that in a moment quite easily, then the colour match tool is really going to be your friend. It saves a bunch of time to just get that baseline, pretty accurate first pass correction going. So remember, this is completely uncorrected footage at this stage, and we're going to start to apply over the top of this one here. Alright, I'm going to use my colour match symbol to start with, and you'll see immediately that we get a change in this screen at the bottom. What are we looking at here? Well, these are a whole load of colour reference points that Davinci's going to use relative to the image that's on the screen to give us a pretty decent first pass. And I mentioned that there are a number of different colour cards that are supported natively. Well, you can use this drop down here to see which ones those are, and in this case I've got the X-Rite ColorChecker Passport Video, so when I click that you'll see that the colour reference points on the left hand side here change, and if you note they are replicating what you can see on the video footage screen here. Okay, great. Well, how do we get this part of the screen to look at this part of the screen and decide what's good and what isn't? First of all, we want to come over to our video window here, and this icon that's currently got the qualifier tool, which looks like a little pipette or something, I'll use the drop down menu here, and I'm going to change that to color chart. And now you can see we've got a frame representation of the color chart itself. In a moment I'm going to zoom in on the image so that we can work more cleanly, but I'll just do a rough pass on getting these corners to line up with the main colour blocks. Okay, let's zoom in now. A bit of adjustment to be done. Bottom corner there, and I think we're pretty much good to go. You might recall that there was a piece of information that I said it would be useful to have when you've got your video footage that just helps to streamline the process a little bit more, and that's what colour temperature was the footage shot at. Well, this footage was shot, as I mentioned, outdoors, mid-morning. It's a pretty overcast day. That means I think we're somewhere between 6,000 and 6,500 Kelvin as a colour temperature, so I'm going to leave that at 6,500. But you can adjust that just by hovering the cursor over the frame and then clicking the left mouse wheel and scrolling right or left. So let's get us back to 6,500. Okay. The second piece of information that you need to know before you do anything else is what's the source gamma for the footage. So I shot this footage on a Canon EOS RP. It doesn't have a log output, so it doesn't have a kind of raw video feed. However, what it does have is a kind of neutral color science, and the recording that I made was in sRGB, so I've used the most neutral setting I can on the camera, and then I'm going to select from here the source gamma of sRGB. Target gamma and target color space, I tend to leave those both at Rec 709. The next bit is super easy. We've set up our frame, we've decided what our color temperature is, we've determined our source gamma, and now we just click match. And there we go, that's the first pass, that's the first part of the process. So the next step we're going to do is a little bit of adjustment just to help to refine some of those changes. Step 2 is focused on doing some minor refinement really to these primary colours at the top line of the colour checker. I'll just zoom in on the image a little bit here and you can get a better view of what I'm talking about here. So this row of colours here is what we're going to focus on in this step. Before I do anything else, I'm going to remember to add a new correction node. Okay, there we go. This time we're not using the colour chart or the colour match tool, but we're going to use the power window icon, which we can see here. If I click that, and I want to select this little icon that looks like a fountain pen here to create a frame. Draw a frame just by clicking at the intersections. And once I've done that, it's isolating and highlighting those colours that I want to focus on. It might not do that for you by default, and that will probably be because you haven't got this magic wand icon highlighted. I'll just click that off so you can see. You might find that you've simply got the frame. To be able to perform the isolation, click on the magic wand icon. Okay, there we go. So now that is showing me the colours that I want to focus my next layer of adjustment on. For this step, I'm going to be focusing down, first of all, on the right hand bottom part of the screen here, where currently we can see keyframes timeline showing up, and that probably will be there by default. In this case, I want to be able to see scopes. If I click on the scopes icon here, the first one that comes up, waveform, isn't what we want on this occasion. I'll use this drop down to select vector scope. And so that we can see what we're doing a little bit more clearly here, I'm going to click on this square icon with the cross kind of motif on it to pop that out. That's defaulted back to the waveform scope, and I want to get back to the vector scope. There we go. Right, so what we're looking to do here is to align our primary colours. In this case we've got red, yellow, green, cyan, blue and magenta. We want to align the lines that you can see here, and they're a little bit subtle to see, with the box that corresponds to that key colour. We're not worried about the length of the line, just the alignment of that line into the centre of that box. And to do that, I want to use the curves tool, which is this curve shaped icon, unsurprisingly here, which again probably will default to this histogram that you can see here. There are actually 6 different visualizations. The one we want to start with is the second one, which is hue versus hue. That's going to enable us to make some adjustments to these colour intersections. You can see coloured dots here relating to our primary colours that we're going to sequentially adjust to get our lines to intersect nicely. So I'm going to start with red, and as I grab the point here that's been highlighted for red, you can see on the scope over here on the right hand side, just watch what happens to that line as I move and adjust the red line. So I want to position it approximately in the centre, then I'll move on to yellow, minor adjustment to make there, green, and cyan. Fairly sizable adjustment to make for the cyan one, as there is in fact for blue. Which just leaves us with magenta, and there we go. Okay, so to my eye those look fairly well aligned with their respective boxes. The change that we'll see on this colour charts in the video window here is fairly subtle, but let's just give you an indication of what that level of change looks like on the colour chart and on the image itself. But let's start with the colour chart. I'll remove the isolation by clicking on the highlights icon, our magic wand. I want to bring back my frame, so if I click back here into the power window icon, there we are, I've got the frame. If if I just lift this bottom right hand corner, you see it's pretty subtle, but it's perhaps most noticeable here in this kind of mid blue, which to my eye, with the adjustment having been made, it's made it a little bit more purple. Perhaps we can get a better indication when we look at the total image, but yeah, there is definitely adjustment there, albeit subtle. So I'm going to zoom out so we can appreciate any change to the total image that we've got here. And making sure that I've got my window icon selected, I'm going to deselect the icon for the fountain pen, and you should then be able to see, yeah, there we go. So an adjustment to the overall image. I'll just switch between those two. It's particularly noticeable here on the colour of my fleece that I'm wearing. So let me just show you again. That looks to my eye much more like what it looks like in real life. It's a pretty subtle adjustment overall to the image, but it's just getting it where it needs to be for the closest degree of accuracy. Right, well, we've dealt with our primary colours. We've done a good proportion of the overall colour correction process now. Step 3, and this is the last step in the process. As before, I'm going to add a new adjustment node. Before I do that, I will just close the scopes window so that we can see the nodes window better. So I'll add a new adjustment node for our third step using Alt and S on the keyboard. And now we're going to focus on this neutrals part of the ColorChecker card here, just to give us a good overall level of contrast and balance in the image from a neutrals perspective, and to remove any colour cast as well. As we did with step 2, we're going to use the window, and I will use this fountain pen icon to create a frame for a mask. I'll zoom in so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Clicking into each of the corners of the card. Actually, this is quite good because we've got a fairly even lighting on each of our 3 colours. If we had some reflection, we might need to look at making this frame slightly tighter, but in this case there's no need because the lighting's pretty consistent. Next step, isolate these neutrals by using the magic wand highlight icon. Now we're focused just on what we're going to be adjusting. Now, to my eye already, there's a bit of a green tinge to this mid-grey here. So let's see how well that gets corrected when we go through this process. As per step 2, I'll be using scopes to help here. Let me click this scopes icon, bottom right. This time around, I don't want the vector scope, I want waveform. Again, to help with better visibility, I'll just pop that out and switch back to the vector scope. So clicking again on waveform. What we're looking at here are the waveforms for highlights, midtones, and then that black dark area represented here. And what we want to try to achieve is an alignment of red, green and blue in each of these cases to end up with effectively a white line, if we can intersect those. The closest we've got at the moment is our dark black tone effectively, but there's still a little bit of separation where we can see the red is separated out from green and blue, which are pretty well aligned. So we'll focus on all 3 of these areas. And to start with, we'll look at the darkest area here. In order to be able to adjust each of those red, green and blue channels, we're going to use again the curves tool. But rather than hue versus hue, this time I want the main histogram which are referred to here as custom. And conveniently, bearing in mind that we want to work with red, green and blue channels, we've got red, green and blue selectable here, and then curve adjustments possible. So, back over to my scopes window, scroll down to the darkest tones, so the black, and look at our corrections there. As mentioned, it's really just red that we want to change. Red's already highlighted in this case. We're going to work at the bottom end of the scope. Now the curve, just one slight click, there we are. Already we've got a very minor adjustment that's given us a pretty good alignment. I'll move up to the midtones. I think what I want to do here is to bring the green channel down to where the red and the blue lines, which you can see a little bit more clearly here, are showing up. So we're working in the mid register, we're moving the green, so I want to select green, pick somewhere around here in the center and start to align until we got something that looks fairly close to white. It's not too bad. I'm probably going to make a slight adjustment here on the blue as well. Okay, I'm happier with that. And by the way, this is focused on the midtone. If we look over here at the video image, that green cast that I could see before, to my eye again, that's been pretty well eliminated. And then into the highlights. Really, this is going to be mostly about moving the blue channel. We're already on the blue curve, so at the top end of the colour curve, it's just the line, there we go. So a nice white line, and as we look back at our video window here where we've isolated out our neutrals, they're definitely looking different to my eye, but let's see to what extent that has changed. And I can do that by, first of all, deselecting the highlight. A couple of ways to do this. I can select my window icon down here, move the bottom right corner, and you can see a very clear difference in the midtones. Not much to notice really in the lower register or even in the highlights, but something has happened there. So that's one way for us to look at it. And the other way to look at it, as we did for step 2, I'll zoom out, centering the image. I'll deselect my fountain pen icon here. And that's quite a significant shift. Particularly noticeable in skin tones, brickwork, and that's giving an image which, to my eye, again, is more representative of what I saw when I was outside and shooting this footage. Well, that's step 3. We've now moved from using, first of all, our automatic first pass of the color checker, which utilized the color match functionality. Then we focused on our primary colors to do a little bit of refinement in step 2, and then finally in step 3 we've looked at those neutral tones just to clean up and give us the final adjustments that we want in terms of tonality and contrast. Let's have a look at what all of that ladders up to in terms of change. I'm going to use Alt and D on the keyboard to deselect all of my nodes. That was the original uncorrected image that we had, and that's where we got to. So it's a pretty significant shift all in all. To give you an idea of the amount of time that would usually take to do, if I wasn't running this as a tutorial, then that's a 5-minute or less process to cover those 3 steps.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit like or even consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.